All right. Looks like we're up and running. Hopefully, I got to get the chat window open so I can see what's going on. We're live on Facebook and YouTube, but I have no one sitting here watching yet. That usually happens a few minutes after the video starts. All right. Oh, now we're getting there. So if you guys, I don't know where you're logged in, but if you throw something into the chat, let me know that you can see and hear me, please. Vincent and Sam, awesome. Thank you. Jason, nice. Here we go. The crowd is building. Of course, I'm still only seeing 2 people on, but now I've got 4. 4 people in the chat. All right. Good video and sound. That was the key. I was waiting for somebody to go, hey. Loud and clear. Good. That's all we're looking for. Awesome. So welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight is more making miters meet. Kind of pick up from where we sort of wrapped up last week with coming back with a couple of different little tips for cleaning things up as we go along here and put things on. First off, thanks for watching. If you are watching this on YouTube, whether it's live or you're watching it at some later date, please hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for the notifications because we do this pretty much every week. And that way you'll get the notifications. If you would also like an additional reminder, please go to the website just below me there and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get an email reminder at some point. And I said I do this pretty much every Tuesday, which is the next announcement that I've got is I won't be here next week, folks. I have another commitment, and I won't be available next Tuesday evening. So we're going to go 2 weeks from now. And I'm not even going to talk about that until we get to the end of tonight's episode here. So, thanks, Kevin. Somebody saw my article in Fine Woodworking. Latest issue came out, and we're getting a nice little crowd here. And yes, I did. The article came out. Shocker of all shockers, the article itself made the cover, which was kind of cool for my first article for Fine Woodworking magazine. So if you subscribe, it's the latest issue. If you don't subscribe, what's the matter with you? So let's sort of jump right into this. Oh yeah, and yes, I got your email, Fred. I just have been exceptionally busy. I'll try and get to you here in the next day or so to see what we can do. Skip's here. Dave Redland's here. Awesome. Earl. Good. All right. So you can see I just kept the box that I used last week to go over how to adjust your miters. And this week, I've actually attached 2 pieces of molding to it. And I've got some pieces cut where we're going to, because I told you this isn't going to be about cutting the miters. It's going to be about this is the best you can get it and what do you do with it at that point. So I think really what I need to do is switch up my camera here and we can take a look. Of course, I need to Should have shut off my, there we go. Had to turn my monitor around for the close-up camera. And I thought that'd probably be easier to do. You first? Crazy? I'm not understanding that, Vincent, but that's okay. I don't need to. So I had a little bit of, I mean, my box was cherry. Again, don't pay attention to the butt joints. That's not any of the purpose of this. I mitered this. These are the two fixed pieces of molding. And I got a nice, relatively tight miter there. Little bit of misalignment, because no matter what you do, let me shut that mail program off there real quick. Sorry, I forgot to do that. And that way we don't keep getting dings on my computer here. I've got a nice tight miter there, but no matter how much we try when we run moldings on a router table or something, if we're doing it all by hand, you're going to get a tiny little bit of variation, particularly when you're ripping the pieces by hand. So I have a slight misalignment. I mean, I'm good and tight on my miter, and this section right here lines up perfectly, and then I get a slight misalignment here with more down on that bottom flat. So that one's a pretty easy one. What I normally do, and I'm gonna show you on a much more exaggerated example of this. So on this side where I don't have the side molding attached yet, if I bring that in, I'm pretty sure you guys can clearly see that, yeah, I'm looking to see if how I can turn this so that you can see. If I pull this in, you can see this whole surface is hanging out past that surface on my, again, it's not tremendous, but that's the whole point of this, is we're not trying to correct things that are major problems, because hopefully if you do everything that we did last week, creeping up on your corners and adjusting the angles to get everything nice and tight, we don't have that problem of a major variation. So I'm gonna take and pop this in. You're gonna just barely see what I'm doing here. Okay, good enough for now. And like I said, you should be able to see that this piece of molding, this surface from pretty much about here, the very peak of that OG, all the way down is overhanging that side piece. So for me, the easiest way to handle that, and again, the miter is nice and tight. It's not like I've got gaps or anything anywhere. I'm pulled tight against the case, or as tight as I can against this case. And I've got a nice tight miter all in itself. I did the sandpaper trick to shim that thing so that I got a nice tight miter on there. So the easiest thing to do, just take a little bit of sandpaper, and because this piece is overhanging that side piece, if I sand that side piece of molding, as I am wont to do anyway, particularly on that flat section, I'm going to switch cameras, and I'm going to toss it up there on its side. you won't be able to see this until I switch back. But the idea is I'm using that long side to just sand off what was overhanging. And now I'll go back to that same position and we'll switch cameras back to the close-up. And you might think that's kind of where I'm going to end, but what it's done is, and I'm not sure this is really visible on camera, but it's certainly evident here in the shop. It's moved the ridge or the peak of my miter off of the intersection of the two pieces of molding, and it's now a 32nd of an inch or a little less over onto this piece, which means all of this right here where the blue is end grain off of that long piece. So the idea here is I can't just stop by going that way on the long side here and working this other piece down to the plane of this molding. I have to come back, and I'm using nice little pieces of white oak molding here because they were leftovers from a project that I did for a client a while back. And what I'm going to do is sand in from the other direction. And what I want to do is feather that in. I want to drag that sandpaper back as far as possible or practical so that I'm not creating a different plane along this piece of molding. What I'm trying to do is very slowly change that profile until my miter pulls back at the intersection of the two pieces of molding. And I want to drag it out into that one stick of molding as far as I can so that it's not noticeable at all. And some of you might say, oh, well, that's kind of cheating. If you were to just cut your miters absolutely perfectly to begin with, then you wouldn't have this problem. And the answer is we're all humans. And like I said, invariably, when I run that stuff on whether I'm using a shaper or a router table to run these moldings, and then I'm pushing the molded boards through the table saw to rip them to final size, I'm going to get some variation. It's a little easier if you have a power feeder on your tool. You get less variation because the pressure remains the same. But I'm going to tell you this, even on 17th and 18th century pieces, this is how they were handled. Because when they were making these sticks of molding with either hollows and rounds or dedicated planes, they weren't uniform from stick to stick. There is some variation. So as much as you can, when you run a stick of molding, you're going to try and keep it as one long length. And then you're going to cut opposing miters into that stick so that you wrap them that way. And that way, at that point, the profiles are similar enough that you have little or no correction to make as far as the profile, the width, and the thickness of the molding itself. Oh, good. We've got a lot of people here. Larry and Bob and Leo are here. Cool. So let's go back to that close-up shot. as long as I didn't move it completely off the table here. And if I run my pencil sideways again and I take a look at where that ridge is, it's now back at that meeting point, the intersection of the two pieces of molding. So all I've done is I took the overhanging piece, I sanded the opposing piece and exposed all that end grain on the overhanging piece. And then what I did was I feathered that surface of the overhanging piece down until I'm right back at the intersection or the actual miter cuts. And I did it in such a way that I've stretched it out over this, you know, half the stick of this molding here. I'm sanded all the way back to about the midpoint on my box. And it didn't take very long. I did it while I was yammering on to you guys, and it was what, maybe 30 seconds. Got that, and like I said, this is white oak. It was nice and easy to sand. Let me sort of clue you into the amount of sarcasm there. But I feathered it in as far back as practical here, and what that did was, when I put a finish on here, you're never going to notice that this surface is diving in towards that corner. Even something, if I build up a shiny film on there, it's so gradual at this point that you won't really see it. So if I come around to the other side, I have two different sticks that I'm going to put in here. So I'm going to widen up my shot there a little bit so that you can see everything that's happening down on this end. So I've got this miter nice and tight, but you can see I've got a tiny little gap between these two sticks. In other words, I've made this one not even a 32nd of an inch short of mating up with that long side piece. So theoretically, if I were to grab a hand plane, and I better remove my, this is for a little bit later here. So to make this piece a little longer, and I think I alluded to this, I may have even said what I'm going to do in last week's episode there. If I just take that surface that's up against my box and I throw this into my vise, if I can get it in there, and I grab a hand plane, which I should have done before because I knew I was doing this. And I just take 4 or 5 strokes. Let's switch back over to that close-up. And what you're seeing is that gap's still there, but it's almost non-existent. So I'm going to take 1 or 2 more strokes. Again, me learning from you guys, creep up on it. We never called it that. We just called it fitting it. I would if I could get it to hold into my vise, but I can't. Oh, we'll just try it. Nope, it's not grabbing. Gripping kind of video going on here. I did not switch back to the wide camera, so you can't see all the trouble I'm having. There we go. We got it. All right, so it comes up fairly tight there now. I do have this side, the long side here, is slightly overhanging. If I turn it that way, maybe you guys can see that this piece comes in here, and this tip on that long side is overhanging. Let's pull that, come in a little tighter. Yeah, you can definitely see that on camera now. Okay, so you can see this piece is overhanging that piece, right? And I see Kevin said he's unsure why I sanded along when I did this other corner, why I sanded this piece first, because I didn't sand the overhanging one down to that point. Because what I did by sanding this way first, and I should have had an opposing color here. If I would have thought about it, I would have made a piece of walnut molding or something that would have color contrasted with my oak. I can see that end grain from this piece. And now when I come back and do the feathering along that long piece along the side there, I know exactly when to stop sanding and modifying this shape, because the end grain will disappear, and what I'll have is a perfect miter, a perfect intersection between these two surfaces. Does that make sense, Kevin? And you can, he says he uses rasp and file to feather that piece into the joint line. I sand across it, you know, just as a different way of saying it. I sand across the overhanging part just to give myself that final line. And if I'm not absolutely perfect, at least the profiles come together fairly well. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense why I did it that way. If you're comfortable doing it the other way, where you're just working the long piece and not dealing with the creating the end grain, that's fine. So I've got one other piece that I put here, and there's no real problem with it. In fact, it's cut the right length. The miter was adjusted perfectly. The idea was I wanted to have one where I cut it a little short, and we could then show you how I planed off that back edge to make it slightly longer. If you end up with a piece with a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch gap between your two sticks, that is not something that you really ought to be remedying by taking material off the back of that piece. I mean, you saw when I threw that other piece in there, this one has a slight, I didn't correct the angles on this because that's my next thing here, is I want to show you a little bit of that. I showed you how to do it last week on the miter saw, but this is tight down at the toe and has a couple of thou gap up at the heel. So, and on the other side, it's even a little more so than that. When I pull that in, I mean, it's nice and tight right out at the tip of that toe. And I've got, you know, probably 4 or 5 thou up at the top of that miter that's open on the heel. So that was one of the things that I wanted to show you. Oh, Patrick's here. Very cool. Would burnishing that, Bob wants to know, would burnishing that intersection work also? Yeah, so that's normally, if that's what I'm going to do, which I try not to do that very often, because eventually that burnish, those fibers are going to want to come back to their normal shape. But if I was tempted to do that, the first thing that I would do is either wipe with a brush or squeeze in some glue with a syringe or a glue bottle or something into that slightly open joint. And then at that point, I'm taking something like my burnisher for my card scrapers. And what I'm going to do is just work that corner from both sides, essentially pushing the fibers on both of these pieces in. You can do that. Adding the glue to it, at least in my mind, kind of hopefully makes things sort of stick together a little better. The biggest problem I have there is now that piece is kind of mushed over and you don't have a nice clean line. So when I can, I try and make the adjustment between the two disparate angles there by sanding and feathering those in until I get everything absolutely perfect. So let's switch back. I'm trying to get to these as we go instead of like last week where I did my whole presentation and then went back and looked at 100 different questions, and hopefully I got to everyone. All right, so I'll put my rig here back into place. And that short piece, hopefully I've got the correct one. Yeah. So I want to work on this miter here. That's the one I told you that, well, first of all, this thing is cut to, was the short one. So I might end up having to take a little more off of that back. You saw the amount of gap that I had. It was less than a 30-second, somewhere 64th-ish, just enough that it was an annoying kind of a gap. And that's where I took a few strokes with my hand plane off that back edge and closed it up. If I've got a solid 64th, between a 64th and a 32nd of an inch gap, at that point I'm going to go over to the joiner. I'm going to set my joiner cut depth somewhere around a 64th or so, maybe a little heavy, and take one pass off of that the mating surface up against my case. Okay, the idea is I'm not going to notice that little fillet on my molding is a 64th of an inch narrower than the sides. And when I put it together, if there's a misalignment and this side here overhangs, at that point I can run in there either with sandpaper or a shoulder plane or something and feather that fillet down until I get to that perfect miter again. And again, you're not going to notice a 64th of an inch variation on something that's only 1/8 of an inch wide like this. You're certainly going to notice if it's a 32nd or a 16th of an inch different, that it just sort of veers off and creates a much narrower piece. Okay. So if I readjust my camera to come over here, yeah, I know it's not on camera for you guys, but I didn't want to make anybody sick by moving this thing around like that. Let's come down a little, make sure that I've got something that kind of, there we go. Now I feel like I can switch my cameras again. Do I pre-fit? So Tom wants to know if I pre-fit the 4 pieces before I attach any to the box. Nope. What you guys saw, and I'm going to switch back to the wide one to answer this one. So I just attached this piece. That was the piece. No, I attached this one because this is the corner that we flowed in, we feathered in. And you saw me nail it on. And the idea is I start with one side, cut my miters until they're nice and flush with my case, attach it. Then I butted this piece into it, marked the other end, and cut that miter, attached it. At that point, as I showed you guys last week, I cut the miter on this end of this stick, hold it in place, make my adjustments until my miter's nice and tight. Whether it's perfectly 45 or not, I don't know, and I don't care. I just adjusted it until it came up nice and tight. Let this end run wild. Once I have that one nice and tight, whether it's overhanging or not is irrelevant as long as the miter's nice and tight. I scribe this end and then I cut it about a 64th or so long, sometimes a 32nd, and then I creep up until I get it right onto that corner. And I do the same with this piece. I start out with them both a little long, about a 64th or so, hold them into place, and then keep adjusting until I get real close. And I start, if I have to, I start doing the shim thing to get my miters. If you're not following what I'm saying here, that means you didn't watch last week's show. So you'll need to watch and see how I did the shimming to get my miters to made up nice and tight. So I attached two until I got, once I got those where I wanted them. And then I had these two pretty much rough fit, put them into place, bring it over, and keep adjusting this miter until this one comes up nice. The heel of this miter is flush with the case. And then at that point, I've still got this piece that was just a tiny bit long, and then I can adjust it until it just drops into place. And that was where sometimes when you're adjusting, even creeping up on it really slow, you end up with a piece where you have maybe, a few thou to, a 64th of an inch, somewhere in that ballpark as a gap on your corner. And that's where taking a few passes with a hand plane, or in extreme cases, going to the joiner and making the molding slightly longer at the heels becomes a necessity, right? So I'm going to jump back over to my close-up, and you guys should see I've just basically I'm using a bench hook as a shooting board. If you guys had attended the woodworking shows, the virtual ones during the era of the pandemic, you would have seen that I have a bunch of these 45, 45, 90 triangles and a handful of 30, 60, 90 triangles that I had cut out using a CNC machine that Hammer had lent me for the shows. You can also make them on a table saw or whatever, but the great thing about, or the Shaper Origin, this is a perfect use for it. The idea was when you draw it out perfectly, draw it out perfectly 90 and 245s on a CNC machine, when it cuts it, you don't have to wonder, oh, did I get my 45 absolutely perfect? It's dead on. So I've got my shooting plane off to the side. So right now it's set to cut an absolutely perfect 45-degree angle. And the problem with that is, if you remember, when I put this piece on the box, the toe was nice and tight, but the heel was open. So very much the same as what I did with the miter saw is I'm throwing a piece of sandpaper at that far end, and nope, wrong one. I should be close because my toe is hitting. So, and I don't normally use a piece of sandpaper this large. And what I'm trying to do is put that shim between my pressure and my cut. The same exact process that we did on the miter saw. And I want to make sure that I'm nice and square here. My fence is a little low. If I was smart and well prepared, I would have attached a taller fence to this triangle that I've got. So I'm going to go back in here and try and get myself lined up nice and plumb. There we go. And you probably can't see it on camera because I'm too far away, but I will try and maneuver here and see if I can't get it on camera here for you. Hopefully, when I pull that in just a tiny bit tighter and adjust, there we go. Now when I pull this in and make it nice and vertical, hopefully you can see there's just the tiniest of gaps at the heel, but I'm touching right on the toe of my miter. So now I can work that down with my shooting plane. Test it. Make another minor adjustment. Again, I normally don't use a piece of sandpaper this big. I want you guys to be able to see what I'm attempting to do here. And hopefully, oh, so close. Once or twice more. And this should be perfect. Ooh, bingo. All right. So now I can move the camera back right over onto, oops, my miter. There we go. And now if I hold that piece right into place, should see that the miter itself is really nice and tight. I had a gap up at the heel. There's no heel. This piece is slightly overhanging that piece, but we're going to take care of that with that feathering that we did earlier. But hopefully that comes across as well on camera as it does here in the shop, which is it's nice and tight across that whole miter. Okay. So at that point, it's a quick and easy. Put my glue on. Again, if you know, I'm pretty sure we talked about glue sizing. Size the miters, let them sit. It doesn't matter whether I'm using white glue, yellow glue, hide glue, whatever. I'm going to thin that glue down about 50% with water. It's got to be a water-based glue, so don't try this with epoxy. And the idea is put that thin down glue on there, let it sit for half an hour, 15 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, whenever it is that you go to touch it and it's no longer feels wet or sticky. At that point, I'm going in with the full strength glue. High glue, you can let it sit for a year. But white or yellow glue, you only want to let it sit until it's no longer tacky. If you wait until tomorrow, you've got to recut your miters or reshoot them and then start all over. Okay. So once I have those sized, now I'm going to put full strength glue on both pieces, bring it right in, bring my pin gun up, pin gun it in place, or I'm going to drive sprigs with a hammer, however you're into attaching your moldings, or you clamp it or whatever. I can tell you that almost every single piece of 18th century furniture that I've ever repaired, restored, whatever you want to call it, the moldings were attached with nails of some sort. Clamps were the expensive items in a shop because making that, I think we went through this on the clamp show. If we didn't, I'm going to say it right now. Making the screw for a clamp took specialized tooling and training to be able to make that. So that all added up to being very expensive. Not only that, but the materials were kind of expensive. So in the age of nothing but hand tools, clamps were a rarity in the shop. So they figured out a lot of other ways to assemble things that didn't require the clamps. So honestly, the idea of throwing a couple of nails in there, nails were plentiful. You could get them from the local blacksmith. You just bang out a couple of hundred every hour, and you've got plenty. Screws were a different animal. Once again, same basic problem to create a spiral thread, a uniform spiral thread on a piece. Specialized tooling, specialized training made screws very expensive. So screws were used very sparingly. Nails were used in abundance because I could throw the glue on there, pop in a couple of nails. Essentially, the nails function as a clamp until the glue dries, and I'm done. So you can do whatever you want with your moldings. I like to use, to be honest, most of my moldings are attached with either a 21 gauge or a 23 gauge pin gun. The 21 gauge I really like because the holes are small enough that you take a little bit of glue, put it on the nail hole, and run that sandpaper over there, and it fills in and disappears almost instantly. But unlike the 23 gauge pin, the nails have a little bit more stiffness to them, so they also have a lot more hold than the 23 gauge. I've had 23 gauge pins where we shoved them in there, and somebody bangs a molding an hour after it's been attached to a case, and the molding slides because the pin is so thin and flexible that everything still slips because the glue isn't fully set. All right, so let's take a look at what other questions there were. So Vincent says he gets a little more satisfaction from using the hand plane and the shooting board for this, if that makes any sense. Of course, I don't do production work. Yeah, no, I that's fine. Once again, it all comes down to that thing that I was talking about before, that I've talked about on several episodes of this. The more tools you have, the more problems you can solve. And sometimes doing the creeping up and fitting on the miter saw or on your table saw is not, you may only need to take off 1 or 2 thou off of your piece in order to get it to fit absolutely perfectly. That's where the hand plane comes in and the shooting board. This is just an appliance. You add the miter gauge, the 45-degree angle fence to this. You can make a dedicated 45-degree angle. Mine's buried. I also have a miter jack. At some point, I'll do a thing on weird 18th century tools that most people don't have floating around their shop. And I've got a miter jack here, which is essentially an angled surface that is a clamp that I could put this into. If I clamp it so that this surface is flush with the face, now I've got something that I can, a guide to run my hand plane on. Pardon me. Kevin said he's not heard of sprigs. Sprigs are basically small headless nails. They're tapered. We would call them finish nails today, but today they're made in a wire factory. 18th century, very small headless nails were banged out in a blacksmith shop. And there's another topic. I've got close to a million 18th century nails, 17th, 18th, and early 19th century nails. So maybe at some point here in the future, we'll do a Tuesday night where we just take a look at period fasteners, which would hopefully be fascinating. not to really get that. Uh, yeah, so sprigs are just headless nails. They're not rose heads. They're not anything with any kind of a head on there. They're literally they're just long, short, usually short, inch and a half or less, tapered finish nails where they have no head. Easy to set, and they disappear. Let's see what else you guys have on there. Tim says he's with Vincent on the hand plane and the shooting board. Yeah, no, it's a good tool. I never once said you should do everything by power tool. Uh, I'm I am very much and always have been a hand tool heavy hybrid woodworker, um, because once again, there are some things that I can do really well with a hand tool that I just can't do as well with a power tool, and vice versa. There are sometimes that I can do things a lot better with a power tool than I can with a hand tool. So for me, it's always picking the best tool for the job. Um, Whether that means it's a more efficient way to do it, a more effective way to do it, or just a safer way to do it, that's what I'm going to do. I mean, you saw tonight when I attempted to clamp that molding into the vise and hand plane it. I only took 5 or 6 strokes off of the back of that. Right now, my smooth plane is probably set closer to a full thou than a half thou. It's a little thick, but that's okay. I wanted to take it down, just enough that I could make a difference in the oak. Doesn't make it easy, no matter what you do. Almost riveting. You mean the 18th century fastener? Well, they did use rivets. Quite often, strap hinges were attached to blanket chest lids with great big rivets. When you close the lid, you would see the big heads of the rivets that came through the top. So, joke gone sideways there, huh? But that again, that's kind of stuff that we could talk about in a separate episode. So tell me we're not going to go an hour and 10 or an hour and 20 minutes tonight. We're 45 minutes in. This is awesome. This is what it was meant to be. You guys have any other? I'm going back to make sure that I didn't miss any questions. I think I answered. I just seen question 1 from Tim was, do I attach did I pre-fit all 4 pieces? The problem you've got when I think I already answered that, but I just thought of something else rereading it. And then your question 2 was, do I glue it or just pin it? Trying to fit this with all 4 pieces detached from the box, you're just everything's sliding all over the place. So that's why what I do is I fit one piece to the case, assemble, glue and attach it with my pins or clamp it, whatever I'm going to do. And then I bring the next piece in, fit that miter. So this one's cut at 45, like I showed you last week. As long as this thing isn't dramatically off. I mean, if I'm cutting this at 40 or 35 degrees, now there's going to be a major difference between the 2 planes of my molding. So at that point, I need to bisect that angle, like I showed you last week, reset my miter, cut, and get closer to an equal miter. If this is 45 and this is 44 or 43, because my angle is acute on the case, nobody's going to notice that this one's 2 degrees different than that one, unless you're dealing with a 12 or 14-inch molding. Then you would notice it. And then, yes, I glue. I've never seen period pieces that I've repaired where the glue wasn't spread on the molding and on the case. I've never seen a molding that was just nailed into place. Nails were cheap clamps. They weren't a method of attachment for the most part. Somebody said they thought that the miter jack show would be excellent. I'll have to impromptu card. Oh, I know who that is. Welcome, Dave. I'm glad you made it. You arrived late, but still learned something. Well, the best part is you're going to be able to go back immediately after I shut this down, and you should be able to watch this right from the beginning again, because it's just that gripping. Well, thanks, Larry. I appreciate that. So he said it, great stuff that can't be gotten anywhere else. I'm not too sure about that, but I'm glad you're learning stuff. I'm glad everybody is. So loads of fun. I will not, like I said, as a reminder, will not be here next week for the live session. So we're going to go in 2 weeks. At that point, I want to do a little thing about stock selection and why you might choose certain types of wood for some things, and why you might choose others over. It'll be a little different than I'm making it sound, but it's going to be about stock selection and the way that I go about it for just about every single project that I've ever made, and every project that students make here when they come in for a class. I try and explain it to them why we do certain things certain ways, and that's what I want to try and cover in 2 weeks on Tuesday. Make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel and you've put those put the notifications on. Don't forget to like this thing, because that way I know you guys are enjoying this and you're learning something. And make sure you head to the website and sign up for the newsletter. I do not overwhelm you guys with all kinds of spammy sort of emails. At this point, everybody's been getting one a week saying, hey, tonight is Tuesday Tips, so join me. So again, Michael's late too. And he said it was because he was out in the sawmill because it was too hot during the day. It's hot where you live too. Amazing. Here we are in, early July, and usually in the Poconos, that where I am, means it's, usually high 70s, 80-ish, but we've been floating in the high 80s, low 90s for days now. So it's really getting on my nerves too. All right. Well, fantastic. Gregory said he's learning too. So I'm very happy that this thing is making people think about what they're doing as a woodworker, and hopefully it helps you guys improve. And I will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.